Imagine it's 1940s and you're in Nazi-occupied Germany and you're hiding a family of Jewish people in your attic or whatever, and you're trying to keep them safe from being captured by the Nazis when one day an SS officer comes and knocks at your door and asks you if you have any Jewish people in your house. Surely, you're allowed to lie to this guy, right? If you're ever allowed to lie to anyone, it's in this situation at this moment. Well, not according to Immanuel Kant. His view, which we now call deontology, is very, very strict about what you can and cannot do. If lying is wrong, it's always wrong. We talked about sort of situational contexts in which maybe killing might be permissible, maybe it's not, within consequentialist theories. Within deontological theories, or in particular with Kantian deontology, when something is wrong, it is wrong. We're not going to be looking at the consequences of it. Now, you might think this looks like a serious bug for Kant's theory, but it's actually going to be a feature, and a really interesting one at that. It's going to take us a while to sort of unpack this idea and see what's going on. So let's get started. We'll come back to this question later on about like what's going on with this Nazi situation and how Kant might be able to address it. Just to be clear, Kant died in the early 1800s. He wouldn't have known what a Nazi is, but this is a pretty sort of prominent objection that's brought up against deontological views like this. That's like, surely, you know, if you've got this moral principle, it can be violated sometimes. But what we need to do is sort of spend some time unpacking what deontology is, and in particular, I want to contrast it with consequentialist theories of ethics. Now, deontology historically came first, but I teach consequentialism first because I think it's a lot easier to understand, and then it gives us a framework for comparison so we can kind of see, okay, what's the deal with deontology? Here's how it's different. So here's one way of cashing out that difference. Consequentialism is what we might call an outside-in approach to morality. What we're going to do is look at sort of the outside, the way that the world is, or we would expect it to be, based on our actions or our motives or our intent, you know, and we would then look at how the world might be, and that would tell us about sort of the moral permissibility of that act. Deontology flips this. It's an inside-out approach. What we're going to do instead is look at the inherent features of the act itself, of like what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. And that will tell us something about the way that it can sort of engage with the world. Let me sort of kind of unpack this a little bit more cleanly with, I guess, like the tagline for deontology. The good is prior to the right for consequentialism versus the right is prior to the good. Let's talk about what this means. So when we talk about something being prior to something in philosophy, what we mean is conceptually prior. So like, if A is conceptually prior to B, then you have to understand A in order to understand B. A really clean example of this, male is conceptually prior to brother. Like, in order to understand what a brother is, you need to understand what a male is, right? Because a brother is a male sibling. So if you don't know what a male is, you don't know what a brother is. Also, if you don't know what a sibling is, you don't know what a brother is. So sibling is also conceptually prior to brother. So what we're saying here for this consequentialist tagline, the good is prior to the right. In order to understand what is morally correct, we need to understand what is morally valuable. Remember, in this course, good almost always means valuable. And this kind of makes sense, right? What do we think about when we think about right acts for a consequentialist theory? The right act is the one that brings about good, i.e. valuable, consequences. So in order to understand what right acts are, we need to have sort of a theory of value in place. And, in the last module, we talked about just sort of plugging in like a hedonist theory of value, where all we care about really is pleasure as being finally or intrinsically valuable. For deontology, the right is prior to the good. In order to have moral value, this thing must be sort of choice-worthy, must have the right kind of moral features. And so this is going to be, it just completely flips things on its head in a really, really interesting way. Because the only way that we're going to understand moral value is in terms of moral choice-worthiness. And this is kind of beautiful once you start to kind of get what's going on and start to unpack it. What we're going to see here then is, since we're going to start by defining sort of what right action is, what that means is that morality itself is going to be derived from just reason alone. You can just chill in your armchair, think about stuff, and that is how you figure out what morally permissible acts are or what morally impermissible acts are. You don't have to figure out what impact they may or may not have on the world. Another really cool thing that deontological theories in general do, and Kantian Deontology does a really nice job of, it respects individual autonomy, it respects individual value. We're not going to have these cases of sacrificing one person for the needs of other people. It's just not even a consideration that we're going to make. This is also why we can explain what's wrong with using people, with manipulating people, because it's not respecting their autonomy. And then we'll have to spend a little bit of time unpacking this last idea. But one really, really cool thing about deontology is it allows us to tell the difference between doing something because it's the right thing to do versus just doing something that is the right thing to do. In other words, like for a consequentialist, as long as you end up doing the right thing, as long as you end up increasing overall value, it kind of doesn't matter like why you did that. For deontology, it really, really will. This is sort of why I think some people get the idea that consequentialism can't really address an agent's motive. It can, and contemporary consequentialist theories do look at agents' motives. But when we're talking about like just sort of the difference between doing the right thing versus doing the right thing because it's the right thing, this is where consequentialism can start to struggle a little bit. It's a really, really interesting dichotomy between these two views. So we're going to start unpacking Kant's framework, and we'll start talking about all of the different aspects of his ethical theory. This is just the preliminary stuff. So if you don't quite follow everything that's going on yet, that's totally okay. We'll start to unpack it, and hopefully it'll start to make a little bit of sense. I'll see you then.